This is a TalkStation original podcast.
Joining us this afternoon, Sean Banks of the Carteret Cooperative Extension Agency. We've been talking with him with a great deal of regularity, and good afternoon to you.
Well, good afternoon.
So what's happening in the world of gardening and vegetable management and yards and ornamentals?
Well, other than the temperatures going up and down and up and down, I looked at the long-range forecast, 7-day forecast, and it looks like we might have pretty close to a frost event at the end of next week.
Have a frost event?
Well, it'll be in the low 40s here in Carteret County, and possibly a little bit further inland, they might be in the mid-30s.
Okay, so is there something we should be... Is this normal for this time of year? So I guess the first question.
Well, our first frost date is around November 20th, but that's give or take 2 weeks. So yeah, this is pretty normal. It's a little bit earlier than what most people would expect, but it's within given parameters.
Okay, November 20th, and we're looking next week at being in the 1st of November. Okay,
right.
All right. So recognizing that we are looking at this frost possibility, what should we do?
Well, the first thing I would recommend doing is getting your plants, if you still have plants outside on the porch, getting them ready to come inside, whether that's into the garage or inside the house.
Okay. All right, we're going to go back to that because we had a very interesting conversation on that a couple of weeks back. As a matter of fact, your column in the Carteret County News-Times addressed that issue as well.
Yes.
All right, so if you've got plants that... they're hybrid plants. They can either be outdoor or indoor, but be prepared. Get them ready to bring indoors. We'll talk about how you prepare for that in a moment. What else?
Right. The other thing I would let everybody know is I know some people still have sweet potatoes in the ground in their own vegetable gardens. I've driven around and seen a few in some vegetable gardens. It's best to go ahead and get those out before the temperatures drop below 40 degrees because it'll do damage to the actual potato, the root, and you don't want that to happen. So you want to go ahead and get those dug and get those moved indoors.
Okay. I failed to get them indoors. We had that frost last night and earlier this morning. How much time do I have before the damage is done?
Well, if we're looking at that as a hypothetical, as soon as the frost hits the root of the plant, it's done for.
Really?
Yeah. So you want to go ahead and get those dug, get them inside the house. Usually what I do with mine is I'll wrap them in some newspaper and then just store them in a warm, dry location just to make sure they don't sprout and that they have time to let the sugar set. But, yeah, I'm one of those. I will be digging mine on either Friday night or Saturday.
Okay, that's all the more reason we're hearing. If Sean is digging his potatoes out, get your shovels out, get started. You caught me on another issue. You said by putting them in a newspaper, they won't sprout. Which not reading the newspaper is not good for them, I guess.
No, I read the newspaper first, but it's just a matter. I don't have wood shavings to keep them dry, and the newspaper sucks any moisture or keeps any moisture away from them.
Okay,
so they don't get the moisture they need in order to sprout.
Okay, what keeps them from sprouting in the ground? Because
they get moisture in the ground, and so they're going to sprout, and that's why you dig them up, and you wrap them in newspaper to keep them dry and cool, so that they don't sprout. Because once they start to absorb moisture and they get to the right temperature, they're going to start to sprout and produce the sprouts for next year's crop.
Okay, all right, okay. Next item, so we're looking at those items that are prone to frost. By the way, isn't it potatoes in the ground? I mean, is that a sweet potato? Well, sweet potato.
Well, the sweet potato, the root is actually very close to the soil surface.
Okay.
And so if we get a hard enough freeze, say down in the upper 20s, then the cold temperatures may get down enough to where they come in contact with that root, and you want to go ahead and get them out of the ground so that doesn't happen.
What happens to the root if it does get frostbitten, if you will?
It gets damaged, and then it starts to mold and to rot.
Okay. All right. If you've got a sweet potato in your garden, plan on bringing it out. Sean's bringing his out starting Friday.
Yeah, we'll get them while the temperature's still warm Friday and Saturday because it looks like come Wednesday, Thursday, it'll start dropping way down low, and I don't want mine damaged.
Okay. Besides sweet potatoes, and of course, we were talking about indoor, outdoor plants. What else?
Well, the other thing is, I know a lot of people have planted lettuce in the garden, and lettuce can be a little bit tender. So if we get that early frost, there is a chance that you might lose some of the leaves on the lettuce or get some tip damage on that lettuce. What I would recommend is just if you've got something that you can create a row cover, just a portable row cover to cover over that one section where you have your lettuce. That will give it at least 3 to 4 degrees of extra warmth from the soil, and that'll protect it from a frost if we have just a very light frost.
Okay, another aspect of this, and that has to do with the material you use for row cover, because we've talked about this in the past. Plastic is not recommended, right?
Right. Now, what I'm talking about by a row cover is kind of a hoop that you can put over there so that nothing's coming in contact with it.
No touching it.
But if you don't have a hoop, like you said, just a sheet or a blanket, something like that will cover it over and prevent it from frosting. A lot of times once you take that off, the plant will be smushed down, but once you take it up, the plant will bounce right back.
Okay. So a row cover is really like a shelter.
Yes.
That's not just a blanket that's on top of it, but a shelter over it.
Right. It's kind of like a mini greenhouse.
If you do that, can you use plastic on a row cover?
Yes, as long as it's not coming in contact with the leaf of the plant.
All right. All right. What about ornamentals?
Ornamentals, if you have ornamentals that you want to protect, I know my wife has a Brugmansia, which is called a trumpet vine, or a trumpet. Anyway, it has a big, long trumpet-like flower, and it has really nice fragrance to it. I bring mine in the house. Some people have planted theirs in the ground, and if you planted them in the ground, the best thing that I have seen done is to take either a 5-gallon bucket or some kind of a wire cage, just some chicken wire in a circle, and then fill that up with leaves, which are already starting to fall. So you can go ahead and rake those leaves up, put them in there, and that gives it enough insulation that come springtime, it'll be able to sprout, grow back up, and you'll have a good start already.
Okay, that leads to a question. If you're looking at certain plants, is it a matter of the actual roots that you have to be concerned with, or the leaves, or the entire plant?
Well, the frost is going to kill the top part of the plant. So if you can put some insulation around the trunk for about 1 foot to 2 feet up, so put those leaves around there, then you won't damage that part of the trunk, and you'll have that part of the trunk to start the plant for next spring. If you don't put any insulation over it at all, a light frost isn't going to kill the root system, and you'll still get sprouts. But I think they're calling for a colder than normal winter this year, according to what I saw in the almanac. And so if we do get that colder than normal winter, then you really need to protect the root system, because if the ground freezes and kills the roots, then you won't get anything coming back. I'm
going to take a pause here and just remind you, you're listening to Coastal Gardener here with Sean Banks of Carter Cooperative Extension Agency. And I did want to remind you, every extension agency, every county in North Carolina has an extension agency, or make that, every extension agency in North Carolina has a county. How about that?
There you go.
So you have your own county. All right. Anything else? I want to go back to a few items you've discussed here for a moment.
As far as the cooler temperatures, not really. Just keep in mind that the lawn is probably finished growing. I don't think mine's grown a whole lot in the last 3 weeks. So if you're going to put the lawnmower away, this would be a good time to go ahead and sharpen the blade, put some oil on the blade so it doesn't rust during the winter, and just give your lawnmower a chance to relax.
Wait a second. Rust on a lawnmower blade is a concern? I mean, does the grass care? All right. You've talked about using potash, putting potash. We can still do that during this period of time.
Right. Potash can be applied anytime.
Okay. All right. We're going to go to a break here in a moment. I want to go to a topic of cold weather and a personal question related to my efforts to plant a tree. Is there anything I need to concern myself with? It's a Japanese maple. It stands about chest high, and the leaves are still hanging on. They're brown.
Right.
But is there anything I need to concern myself with, such as increasing the amount of ground cover or mulch?
Well, one thing that you can do is put about a 1 to 2 inch layer of mulch around underneath the entire plant.
Okay, can the mulch touch the
mulch can touch the trunk of the tree. I would usually recommend keeping it about 1 inch to 3 inches away. And the reason for that is that voles are little field mice kind of things. They like to feed on vegetation, and one of the things they like is young tender bark. I've seen them feed on young apple trees and young pear trees, but they like to eat the bark. And if it's protected right up to the trunk of the tree, then they're more likely to eat that.
Okay. 2 questions. How do you identify that voles have attacked your tree? And then the second one, if that does happen, does that damage the tree to the point of possibly it not living?
Well, if voles come and attack your tree, they can attack it in one of 2 ways. The first way, the easiest way for them to do it, is to come up. If you've got mulch right up to the trunk of the tree, they'll come up and they'll start chewing on the bark. And if they go all the way around the tree, that's called girdling the tree.
Okay.
And they remove the bark all the way around, so there's an entire ring where there's no bark. Then your tree's going to die because it can't produce any new bark to the outside in that particular area. So it's not going to be able to green up next spring. The other way they like to attack the tree is they'll eat the roots. And I've seen in the one or 2 cases that I have seen has been with rose bushes, where they fed on the rose bush roots and ate right up to the crown of the plant. When you pull it out, you can see the little teeth marks on there. It's not like it just rotted. You can see where it was fresh wood, and you can see the little tiny teeth marks on there where they gnawed on the wood and ate the roots up.
Okay. I'm wondering, do these voles not walk on top of the mulch? They come underground, sort of thing.
Voles are kind of like moles. They like to be hidden underneath.
Okay.
So a lot of times you find them in the field underneath the grass, not in the ground. They're lazy diggers, so they don't like to dig in the ground. But if they come up to a piece of plywood or a piece of wood that's laying on the ground, they'll dig the tunnel right underneath the plywood. And then when you pull that up, if you see a tunnel right under there, it could be a vole tunnel and not necessarily a mole tunnel.
All right, we'll come back to that in a moment. We're going to be talking with Sean Banks again, Carter Cooperative Extension Agency, here on Coastal Gardener. Always some very good information provided.
Hi, I'm JJ Smith.
And I'm Zach Nally.
And we're Carteret County News Times reporters and host of the new podcast, Paper Boys.
Join us each week as we bring you exclusives with coaches and athletes, tournament organizers, and newsmakers in the world of sports.
We'll cover high school football, basketball, and so much more, as well as catch up with former star athletes from our county and beyond.
Listen every week to the Paper Boys podcast, streaming now on Spotify, YouTube, and at CarolinaCoastOnline.com. New episodes every Friday.
Sean, the other question that I'm wondering about, and that has to do with the indoor-outdoor plants. I want to touch on that again. You mentioned this a while back, and you did an article that appeared in the Carter County News Times, as a matter of fact. And I think this is an important story. You've got to prepare your plants, the plants you're bringing indoors. You just don't I gather from our conversation, I just don't walk out there, grab that plant, bring it indoors, and then say, fine, I've protected the plant. That's not going to help it. Am I correct on that?
Well, you can just go out and bring it in, but the plant's going to get really stressed if you bring it in and it stays in there for a week or 2 weeks. It's going to, the leaves are going to start to turn yellow. You'll notice the leaves dropping off because it hasn't had time to adjust to the lower light levels.
Okay.
And so it's best if you've had the time during the last 3 or 4 weeks to start moving them into more and more shade, so that they'll get used to the lower light intensities.
Okay, so let's again use my hypothetical I did earlier too. I bring the plant in because I suddenly realize it's going to be frost tonight. I'm going to bring it in, and it's going to be cold for several days. It's okay to have that plant near a window, by the way, of course, because it's used to having more sunlight. However, back to earlier conversations and columns that you've written, sunlight coming through the glass is greatly filtered. I don't care if it's just a standard glass,
right?
Not polarized, but a standard sheet of glass. It still filters the amount of UV rays, I guess.
Yes, it's going to prevent the UV and the shorter waves from being able to get through that light or through that window.
All right. So I've done this for 3 or 4 days. Then is it advisable for me to take the plant back outside again in a shaded area so that it gets, I guess, more filtered sunlight, but of greater strength? It's so as to not overstress that plant?
Yes, you can do that. In our area where we may have 1 or 2 nights where it's cold, and then we might have another week of warmer weather where it doesn't drop below 50 degrees, it's okay to bring those in for a night or two and then take them back outside once you know the weather's going to be warm for a few days, and leave them out for a few days. I would put them in a lower light intensity underneath a tree or under an awning where it only gets a couple of hours of direct sunlight to keep it used to being inside the house, because we might, you never know, have a week or 2 weeks of temperatures that don't get above freezing, and you want that plant to not drop all its leaves.
Okay, can the plant stay out overnight during those times of no freezing weather?
Most of the tropicals and subtropical plants that we use as house plants, we can leave those outside when temperatures are down around 50 degrees, but once they get into the 40s, they really start getting damaged.
Okay.
And so, especially if the temperatures drop below 40s and you start getting 39, 38, you definitely want to have those inside the house, because you're going to get some cold stress on those plants.
All right. Related to plants outside, that now that we're going to have this potential frost next week, that's what we're talking about. You've got some plants that are going to, you can't bring in, they go through a normal dormancy anyhow.
Right.
I'm thinking maybe a rose bush, hydrangea. Are we going to start seeing them dropping their leaves in anticipation, or starting next week if we have this freeze?
If we do get a frost, then yeah, you'll see a lot of them dropping their leaves. Most plants are already preparing to drop those leaves.
Right.
That's what causes that's what the color change is causing. They're starting to cut off. There's an abscission layer between the branch and the leaf, and the plants are starting to cut that off, and so they're moving as much of the nutrients out of the leaf and into the trunks and the roots of the plant to store for the winter, for those that are deciduous. So they're starting to prepare to drop those leaves. But if we do get a frost, they'll probably drop those leaves a little bit quicker.
All right. Then I want to go back to voles and moles for a few moments. A vole is much smaller than a mole. And are they blind like moles are?
No, voles are actually closer related to field mice. They have eyes, they have ears, they have a tail, but their tail is really short. So instead of the long tail that you see on mice and rats, a vole has a really short tail, usually about half an inch or maybe even a little bit less.
Do they come into the house?
Not necessarily. Voles generally, well, I've never heard of voles coming into the house.
Okay.
Everything I've heard coming into the house has been the field mice and the rats.
And squirrels.
Yeah, well, those two, if they can get in.
And boy, I don't know which is, I think probably the worst is squirrels, but that's another story. All right. The question now about voles. Obviously, you said they're lazy diggers, so you won't see them making the scars across the yard that a mole will.
No, if you see tunnels in just under the soil in your turf grass, that's more than likely that's a mole. Because voles like to burrow underneath the mulch, or if there's some thick grass, they'll get underneath the thatch and the thick grass.
All right. What can you do with voles? First question.
There are poisons, the rat poisons, that there are some that are labeled for voles. The one thing that you want to be really cautious of is
animals.
Yeah, you don't want other animals getting a hold of it. There is what they call an apple sign test. If you see a little hole somewhere in the mulch and you see a little bit of damage to some of your plants, maybe your hostas have been disappearing, you can put a heavy ceramic pot upside down, put a piece of apple in there, wait for 2 or 3 days. If the apple disappears, you know it's not something else, so it has to be something that's coming up underneath and coming into the pot from underneath. That's generally a vole, and that would be where you would want to then take and put some of that vole poison in there, and they'll come up and they'll feed on it, and they'll be the only ones that can get to it.
All right. Do voles have a large population? Do they congregate, for example?
Yes, voles will multiply like rabbits. They multiply really quickly, and so two voles in April or May can end up being 200 voles by the end of June or July.
Wow. But they tend to go into gardens. You said lazy diggers.
They're lazy diggers. They're vegetative eaters. They eat vegetation. So they're going to eat like your tulips. They'll eat your hostas. They'll eat those fleshy roots on your roses. They're going to eat the vegetation. Do you have very many calls for voles? I don't get a whole lot of calls for voles. Most of the calls I get, they think they have voles, but it ends up being moles because what they're seeing is the tunnels in the grass. Okay, that leads me to the next question. What do we do about moles? With moles, if you're wanting to get rid of them, probably the easiest and most definite way of being able to get rid of them is find a long straight tunnel, usually along a sidewalk or a driveway or someplace like that.
Okay.
Push it down, mark it so that you know where you pushed it down. If it pops back up by the next morning, then you can get a mole trap, and you can trap that mole. The good thing about moles is that each mole needs about a half an acre of lawn or yard, or half an acre of property in order for them to be able to find enough food to sustain themselves. So there's usually only about 2 to 3 moles per acre.
Okay, I like that. A good thing about moles.
Well, you get rid of one and you're pretty much assured that it's gone.
Okay, all right. That's very. Are they territorial?
They're very territorial. They'll defend their territory. Usually, you'll find when they've done studies, you'll find that the male tunnel will overlap with the female tunnel, and you might have 2 or 3 males that their tunnels overlap with the female tunnel. But generally,
can you tell
take up
when it's a male
acre.
or a female by the size of the tunnel or
No.
something? Okay, all right. You're just using it as all right. We're
No,
talking.
they found out by trapping the moles and finding out which ones were overlapping.
We're talking with Sean Banks again, Carteret Cooperative Extension Agency. Sean, we'll wrap things up here in a moment. Related to moles, and of course you mentioned traps. You can trap them live, or you can also dispose of them. They're not a protected species, are they?
There is a star-nosed mole that is found in wetland areas.
Okay.
And so generally the USDA wants you to get a permit to trap the moles before you go trap them. And all it pretty much is filling out a form. Once they get your address, they can tell whether you're in the area for where the star-nosed mole might be.
Okay.
And so if you're not in that area, they'll give you the permit.
All right. We're wrapping it up with Sean Banks of Carteret Cooperative Extension Agency. There is an extension agent in every county, and of course, our broadcast covers many counties. So the website for that, for finding that information out?
If you wanted to find information or ask me more questions, you can go to our website, carteret.ces.ncsu.edu, or you can substitute your county's name for Carteret.
Okay, and then final question. Have you had a lot of questions here recently as we move into the fall season?
I'm getting a few questions. It's not a whole lot.
Okay.
We have had a few people that have noticed molehills popping up.
All right.
So they're evidently starting to spread out and get ready for winter.
Oh, lucky us. All right. Well, with that, Sean, as always, thanks for being with us.
You're welcome.
I'm Ryan Kelly,
I'm Lynn Schultz.
and we're the hosts of the Senior Moment podcast.
Each week, we bring you conversations with experts right here in our community about the common and uncommon challenges facing our aging population and caregivers.
We discuss the challenges of caring for a loved one with dementia, as well as the importance of health planning, family history, and much more.
Join us every week for Senior Moment, streaming now on Spotify, YouTube, and at CarolinaCoastOnline.com.